Hello, everyone, and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space again. Thank you for joining us for the next installment in the Thinking Aloud series. This entitled Collective Thinking, Archives, and Histories. To help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. Maybe, as you know now, we work with the university community at Fourth Space to create daily events to help mobilize knowledge, looking at current research questions at the university. We're running this event today as a live stream Zoom meeting, so friends on Zoom, please participate. Feel you can through questions in the chat. You can raise your virtual hand and we'll try to bring you into the discussion at the end. Those of you in the space, we will get a microphone to you for questions. That would be great. And with that, it is my pleasure to hand the mic to our moderator for this afternoon, as well as current artist in residence with the Department of Studio Arts, Santiago Tavera. Santiago.
Hi, thank you, Doug. Thank you, everyone here at Fourth Space for having us, and everyone who's here present and also online, and to our panelists. Thank you for joining me in this conversation in the panel titled Collective Thinking, Archives, and Histories. So with this panel, I brought together some artists, researchers, curators, to explore different questions around positionality within histories, places, and archives. Always with the goal to allow to open spaces for new voices to emerge and create counter narratives on issues and dialogues around communities, around ourselves, our identity, memory, and embodiment. So today in the table with me, we have John Latour, KG Guttman, Pamela Cosi, Chris Torrifo, and Rodrigo D'Alcantara. I'll introduce each of them as just before they speak. So to start off, we'll start with Pamela Cosi, who manages the Visual Collections Repository here at Concordia University. So I'll hand it off to Pamela.
Should probably use the mic.
Yes. Let me get your...
I guess it's just right.
Sorry, we'll be using the same computer, so we'll have a bit of a juggle with the technology, but we'll be okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pamela, and I manage the Visual Collections Repository, or also known as the VCR. Thank you for having me on this panel today, and I'm going to talk about our Curator in Residency program. First, I'll give a brief introduction about the VCR and explain what we do. Created in 2018 with the merger of the Faculty of Fine Arts Film and Slide Library, the VCR provides access to visual resources, media services, research support, programming, and training opportunities for faculty and students. In collaboration with the Concordia Library and University Archives, VCR manages 4 distinct collections: the Moving Image Teaching Collection, celluloid films, digital images, and 35mm slide collections. We straddle both worlds by pivoting between our analog past and the digital futures. Located on the 3rd floor of the EV building, the VCR is also a beautiful and welcoming space that promotes research creation and collaborative pedagogy. So here I included just the main space area, which is a beautiful sunlit area with plants. So it could also be a study space for students as well. In 2020, the VCR introduced an annual Curator in Residence program funded by the Faculty of Fine Arts. The residency invites scholars to curate a collection of works by Black, Indigenous, and people of color filmmakers and artists. Today, I'll talk about the goals, methods, and outcomes of the program, while Santiago, one of our current curators in residence, will speak more on behalf of the experience. Our program has been running for 3 years now and aims to expand on collection development and provide a learning opportunity for emerging curators. Every year, 2 Concordia alum are chosen to examine our collections, make a selection of new acquisitions for films or images, and present their research to the wider community. Here are portraits of our curators, Desiree de Jesus, Vanessa Cardoso, Tanvi Rajvanshi, Ilya Myers, and a special shout out to our current curators, Juana Espina and Santiago Tavera. This is more of a collage of still images taken from artists that were chosen by curators. I promise I will properly credit artworks later on in the presentation, but this was more of a visual interpretation. Some images are new additions to our collections, and older works were scanned from 35mm slides. The artists on this page are Carlos Collin, Jonatas de Andrade, Maria Veronica San Martin, Elio Oticia, and Leah Clark. And this image is a collection of film stills chosen by our curators. The titles are from Call Shop Istanbul, La Petite Vendeuse, Girlhood, Rafiki, Black Mother, Black Daughter, The Watermelon Woman. In the program, each resident is given $2,500 for 70 hours of work. By holding regular meetings with the curators, we aim to create a safe space to share opinions and foster new ideas. We recognize that the program is a learning opportunity for emerging curators, and we're here to provide guidance and assistance. This timeline illustrates the workflow, which takes a year to complete. Researching our collection happens in the winter term, while planning for the output is normally done in the spring and summer, with a presentation in the fall. So here I'll talk more about the goals. So for collections, the program aims to empower curators to collaborate rather than merely participate in collection development. They are encouraged to establish connections between their new acquisitions and existing works to foster a dialogue between art, identity, and space. Material chosen by the residents is deeply personal and represents who they are and how those stories are being told. As the curators do their research, we also use the opportunity to examine our own collections and bring to light older films and images that may have been overlooked. In some instances, we realized that the material may not have been properly cataloged, which made it difficult to find. Trust. This was a big one. We really took the time to build a relationship with our curators to get to know them and feel their voices are being heard. Trust also needs to be built with the independent filmmakers and artists. We sometimes change our outreach by initiating contact through social media instead of commercial and academic channels. We were also mindful that some artists had never shared their works with an academic institution and had to guide them through the process, as well as be flexible. Commitment. We are aware that sometimes new initiatives can appear performative when there's no long-term commitment in place. Therefore, our program, which has now been running for 3 years, is going to be integrated into our research budget funds. And share. This example is an event of sharing. Our curators will organize public screenings, talks, exhibits in collaboration with the community. For example, Vanessa curated a show in the art history vitrine, and here's a poster from a screening and talk prepared by Ilya Meyer with the Black Perspectives Office last year. We're also working on creating a new page on our website that will showcase the curator's research, which unfortunately is not up yet, but will be very soon. And Desiree's research is already highlighted in the Black Studies Research Guide through the University Library. I'll share links at the end of the presentation. Here are some quotes taken from our residents in their curator statements. I'll just kind of leave the screen up so you can read them, but as you can see, they express very personal feelings about identity and belonging. A common discussion in our meetings was about talking about what drew us to the arts, even though there was a lack of representation. So here we have quotes from Desiree de Jesus, Vanessa Cardoso, Tanvi Rajvanshi, and Ilya Myers. And then in conclusion, the VCR residency program goes beyond theatrical discussions and delves more into the practical process of implementing change. We understand that people are drawn to stories that are familiar or resonate to them, which is why different perspectives always need to be included in the collection development process. Regardless of who occupies the leadership role, there's always susceptible to potential misrepresentation or biased decision-making. And so perhaps the solution lies in distributing that process across a diverse group of individuals rather than vesting it solely in one person. In conclusion, the aim of the program is to foster meaningful engagements and allow for new perspectives to follow. By providing a safe space, voices can express themselves through trust, mindful collaborations, and care. Thank you. And Instagram handle, vcr.concordia. And I'll quickly talk about, there will be a call out for the next residency program posted in November, open for applicants all month. We'll announce it through social media on our website. Requirements are a statement, CV, letter of reference, and already have a degree from Concordia. For the applicants, we really look for research interest and familiarity with our resources and space. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. So to lead that presentation, I'll talk about my experience in this curatorial research program. So let me just open my slides. So I'm Santiago Tavera. I'm a Colombian and Canadian artist and researcher on the current artist in residence in the intermediate program, the part of the Department of Studio Arts, and a curatorial resident at VCR as well. So today I'm going to be talking about more my research in terms of this curatorial program and my curatorial interest, which is something that I'm not used to presenting on too much, since I'm always kind of presenting more of my artistic practice. Sorry, I have trouble switching slides. So although today I won't be focusing on my artistic practice, I wanted to give context in my artistic interest in constructing counter narratives to the use of different digital media in combination with other mediums such as performance, 3D graphic animation, text, sound, archival material, as well as architectural elements, which you can see a bit of previous works that I've done. In this, I've always been interested in creating this type of blur experiences of physical and virtual spatial embodiments of the other, of the narrative from the other perspective. So I'm interested in constructing immersive as well as interactive projects that expand the body and perception to evoke this type of virtual simulations of migrant as well as queer narratives of dislocation. So this creative research of constructing interactive and immersive experiences of dislocation have also turned into exploration of other voices within my own community, that through similar tools of artistic production, such as collaboration, experimentation with digital media or physical materials in relation to embodied experiences, how these practices are also constructing counter narratives of the queer and the Latinx community. So with my recent curatorial exploration, it's another one. With my recent curatorial exploration, my goal has been focused on exploring the Latino and queer diaspora narratives that are presenting alternative ways and new imaginaries of presenting the Latino, the queer, and the female body. So before I talk a little bit about the VCR research, I wanted to present this first curatorial project that I did back in last year in 2022, where I was working as part of the team, the organizing team at Céline Bourreau, where they opened the opportunity for me to do a curatorial exhibition that I titled A Flower and a Thousand Paths, so Una Flor y Mil Caminos, where with this exhibition, I was very interested in exploring ethnographies of the other and alternative networks of communication. And with this exhibition, I invited collective explorations or collective practices. So with this exhibition, I invited two collaborative practices or collectives from Colombia, and I paired up that narrative of Colombian-led practices in terms of exploring queer narratives and identity with a collective that I co-lead with a collaborator called Laura Costa, where we were interested in putting these narratives of again, Colombian-led practices on identity, queer, and diaspora within the same space. So that was the idea, to put these pieces together. So with that, this is one of the pieces of Elsewhere Studio, which is the collaborative studio that I co-lead with Laura Costa. This one, in this exhibition, she presented a piece called Three Leaks, which she directed, but it was also part of a collaborative process that she did with other artists from our own community. So with this piece, the project that she presented was exploring layer connections of the female body through generational trauma. So the project presented a textile video performance that was being altered live by the wind being captured through a wind sensor that was installed outside of the gallery. So you see a bit of the images and how on the left image it was being altered by the movement of the wind. As part of this project, or within the Elsewhere Studio exploration, I also presented a piece that I collaborated with Milton Riaño, who's here with us in the audience, Alana De Vito, a speech pathologist, and numerous family members. With this piece, I presented a series of images of neural activity along with 3D scans of flowers and pathways that I recorded or I captured both in Colombia and in Canada. And for me, this was a way of also exploring language and community support as a way, as an extension of identity. Other pieces that were part of this exhibition were the two collectives that are based in Bogota, Colombia, which are Mutante as well as House of Tupamaras. So one of these pieces, so you can see them there right now. So Mutante, the piece on the left, one of the pieces that they presented on the left, explore how bacteria are independent and distributed communication networks that act collectively. So they presented blueprints, a video about this parabolic Wi-Fi umbrella, which was also present in the gallery space. And this worked as an extension to extend the signal of mobile phones, which is essentially useful in social protest. On the right, we had a piece by House of Tupamaras as a video installation that was presented in this spiral staircase with lights, with reflective mirrors, as well as text. So this piece called Failure is My Style presented a utopic vision of queerness while using broken text to question the self within structures of dissidence. So this project celebrates empowerment through failure, movement, and our connection with others. So this project led to me applying to the VCR called for an image curatorial residency, which I ended up applying, and I started the curatorial research project this year. So my focus here and my interest in queer and Latino diaspora narratives continue, which led to me trying to map this community within today's contemporary art scene in Canada. So with that, I felt like this goal of mapping this specific community really came from the work of many years from key curatorial researchers in the city, like Nuria Cartón de Gramont, Marisa Rosales Argonza, Tamara Toledo, Claudia Arana, among others, as key academics and curators dedicated to bringing attention to Latin American art in Canada. So within the VCR archives, as well as other archives and collections that I checked around the city, like at Artex, I found gaps specifically on this intersectionality of queer practices and Latino diaspora narratives. So I found in the VCR collection, they had works by Felix Gonzalez Torres, as well as, these are only selections that I wanted to show today, as well as Ana Mendieta. So following this path and these documents that already exist at VCR, I wanted to incorporate the current scene of Latino queer diaspora that's presenting, that's exploring, or that with projects that have the body kind of in the center as a center focus. That's also mixing and exploring digital, different materials in terms of physical materials, but also digital materials, again, to construct new narratives and forms of storytelling. So with that, I couldn't start this selection or this research of these practices without focusing and talking about these key female Latina figures that have opened up a lot of different doors within Montreal, the Montreal scene, but also in Canada, I would say. So again, I'm mentioning only a few people in this presentation, but there's definitely more that we can, can be a longer presentation. So there's works by Elena Martin Franco, who's interested in creating autofictions to explore boundaries between cultural, national, and gender identities. There's also works by Maria Escurra from Mexico and Argentina. Elena Martin Franco is from Colombia. I want to make sure that I say their nationalities. Maria Escurra is using textiles and medium to explore narratives of displacement, memory, and gender identity. So other queer projects, so moving from these feminist kind of perspectives, other queer projects questioning normative roles, identity, positionality, and belonging within spaces we occupied include works by Guatemalan and Toronto-based artist Francisco Fernando Granados. So with his work, he uses fiction and abstraction as tools for storytelling while exploring the queer and migrant body as well. In Montreal, I wish I could expand more on these practices, but that will definitely be more included into the collection of VCR. So in Montreal, there is an active queer and Latinx artist scene that I feel lucky to be part of. So I wanted to show also this collaborative project that I did with Laura Costa, where we're constructing a series of 5 counter narratives and immersive and interactive installation projects where we are questioning a lot about the relationship of the body to different spaces. So we think that with creating these scenographies where we merge her practice of textile and performance with my interest in digital media exploration. Similarly to the sense of creating other ways of storytelling and narratives, there's Rodrigo D'Alcântara, who's from Brazil and who's joining us here in the panel and who will be able to expand more on his practice. With works like this one that I'm showing right now with the slides, where he was, which is part of a triptych series of films that present Latin futuristic mythologies, again, like it's the case in this specific piece. There's also projects by Santiago Tavera Soler, with his video game aesthetic in this video piece, what presents a type of dystopia set in the Andes as a post-apocalyptic queer Latino community that will repopulate the world. So that's that piece. Following this type of, these last projects that I show were examples of projects that kind of present these new imaginaries of the queer Latino identity in physical, fictional, as well as virtual spaces. This other selection of projects I collected or that I'm exploring are exploring this sense of queer and female body and its representation and existing within virtual realms, such as social media, YouTube, as well as pop culture imagery. So works by Francisco González Rosas from Chile, who uses different techniques that explore self-representation through the constant amplification of the body through technology. And he presents with this specific piece tensions between the diversity mandates of art institutions. A similar project to his is Liliana Gonzalez Arquin from El Salvador, who explores voyeurism and censorship with a project that started using Instagram's flaw in the algorithm, while also questioning patriarchal social constructs and social media platforms. So finally, another work that I have is Camila Salcedo, who's a Toronto-based artist from Venezuela, who's exploring gender roles through the use of textile to embody personas and characters as tools for self-expression of queer and feminist identities. So part of this curatorial research project will consist in leaving a database, like Pamela was saying, as part of the website that they're working on, with all these resources, with a catalog or a database of all the research that I've been doing in the last few years. I think it's almost the whole year, on these specific queer and Latino diaspora narratives. So it will live in the website, and we'll see which ones of this selection will be part and will be acquired to be part of the VCR collection, the images as well as the film collection. So my interest in the intersection of queer and Latino diaspora narratives has induce and produce a community that's constructing a new artistic language and decolonial methodology of art making and dissemination within contemporary art here in Canada. To me, these projects and artists present multiple forms of being in different sites and construct alternative ideas of identity and belonging through collective dialogue, and as well as different ways of representation. So both queer individuals and members of diasporic groups share the state of being disoriented, as Sarah Ahmed would describe, always in a state of multiplicity and flux, with the constant feeling of seeking alternative ways of inhabiting time and space, of relating to others, and of becoming. So while navigating and negotiating different worlds, different languages, and social contexts, always in this space of ambiguity. So the state of uncertainty for me, or I think it allows for a repositioning and an embrace of this state of dislocation, which I think open up possibilities for new narratives and forms of storytelling to emerge. And as such, allows us to create our own queer and migrant imaginaries. So thank you. So now, so he can expand a little bit on his practice and his research. We're going to pass the mic to Rodrigo Alcantara, who's an artist, curator, and a PhD graduate in the art history department here at Concordia University. So
thank you so much, Santiago. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to acknowledge that today we are having a general strike worldwide in favor of the Palestinian people. So I invite you to reflect about that and in the continuous violence that we still suffer from a neo-colonial system. And also in Brazil, we are facing one of the worst environmental crises that we ever faced in Amazon, and it's not getting the news as it should. But a lot of people are dying. A lot of indigenous communities are isolated and unable to get food, unable to get water. So yeah, I just would like to really begin my presentation by acknowledging this scenario. And it's kind of a reminder for us why it's important to have dissident perspectives in institutional levels and spheres, and why we need to, have a change. And my presentation will focus on my practice, but it's kind of like I will improvise more. Like in my speech, I prefer to just follow the images and be more connected with you, like as I speak. So first I will, am I sharing? No, sorry. The first slide that I brought is actually a collection of some images from my family archive. And like I was born in 1992, so it's where my archive as a person, as a human being began. So I brought a memory from this moment and other special moments, like with my grandmother. I was born in Niterói, which is close to Rio de Janeiro. I was raised in my first childhood in Jacarepaguá, which is in the suburbs of Rio. And then I moved to Brasilia, the modern capital of Brazil. And this whole experience also informed my own practice and how I express myself in the world. This last image on the right is a collage from 2021 that I did as part of a series called Self-Declaration, in which I reimagined my own family archive with a matriarchal approach. And I would jump, as I don't have much time, to what I did during my master's in Rio. In Rio, I was really like, I was kind of like blown away by the big city again, and that I was living, you know, like in a really queer, vivid scenario. Brasilia can be really, you know, like rigid, and it's a modern city. So, you know, there is like this huge scale, this like full of monumental places, but you feel really isolated as a human being. So I was, you know, like blown away by how I reconnected with my roots and how I could navigate the streets and the culture. It was so alive. And then I connected with the queer community, the trans community in Rio. And I began to create this movie called Ascension and Fall of the Bichas, or in Portuguese, Ascensão e Queda das Bichas. Was my first huge movie project. And I began to notice back then how I was already creating some exhibitions with colleagues from the academia. So it was basically like the curatorial projects that I was involved were related to academic thought. And I was really missing have this more impromptu element. And I began to notice how in my own practice, I was also creating narratives. And I was inviting people that I had a connection and I had affection. So the affection element is really important for me, like be able to connect in a human level and be able to learn from these intersectional spheres as well. Of course, I don't romanticize, I don't idealize what is to deal with different social backgrounds, you know, and life experiences. So like working with BIPOC, trans, queer communities was a big challenge for me as well, of course, to navigate my own intersectional values with others, with the others' values. And, but in this movie, Ascension and Fall of Bichas, basically, I created a contemporary mythological narrative in the future, like in a non-located future. I really liked this idea of not framing a specific timeline, because I think this model has failed, like the notion of projecting a future through the accelerationist agenda of neoliberalism and neocolonialism has failed us all. And we are living the consequences right now of this collapse. And we are really trying to create a more radical imagination. So I'm really about, you know, going towards radical imagination and thinking about hauntology, right? I am a hauntological researcher, so I think about this idea of failure as well and error. So this movie was embracing all these concepts that would also be part of my theoretical research in my PhD right now. And at this moment, I was already syncretizing a lot of cultural elements from the Afro diaspora and indigenous communities in Brazil with the Christian iconography. And I was really interested in iconoclastic thought as well, like how to kind of disrupt with this Christian iconography. But then I realized when you go towards iconoclastic thought, you will also embrace the sacred. And I was like, I am also interested in the sacred. I really connect, with my spirituality and with my fragmented background with different identities that compose my ancestors. So then I created, once I finished my master's, I began this series called Syncretic Series. And then I slowly began to detach from this Christian iconographical thought, and I created my own mythologies, and I began to have more agency over my own symbolisms and dreams. So like it's a series of 4 movies right now that began in 2019, but it is still going on. Like I don't have any timeline for finishing this series. And they all are related to nonlinear times, to Latin American futurisms. The first one is called Hybrid, or híbrida in Portuguese, and it is still attached to the Greek mythology, but it was like an attempt to reimagine the Medusa history from a non-binary perspective. I collaborated with Avaf and Ana Mateus Abadi, both Brazilians. In Capicarã, the second one, I created a mythology related to the savannas of Brazil, where I was raised in Brasilia. So I was kind of like grasping elements from the fauna. Capicarã means in Tupi, which is an indigenous language from Brazil, one of the main ones. It means like the grass that it scratches. So it's basically like this mythological being that cannot be seen totally for like the eyes of people that he cannot trust. So he only shows up for people that he really can trust. Then I had Sinfonia Lunatic in 2020. As Santiago already presented a little bit, is a Latin futuristic narrative in which 2 heroes, non-binary heroes, are searching themselves in this isolated island in the sidereal space, where this goddess entity is narrating the masculinity state of lunatism. And it's kind of like a sarcastic narrative about how masculinity can be toxic, how like masculinity impacts all of our lives as well, in the way that we were taught in this patriarchal society. And in Sacred Dilemma in 2021, I was really going to, we were in the pandemic, right? Like Sinfonia Lunatic was released before the pandemic, and then the pandemic came. I was living with my grandmother, my mother, in Brazil, while taking classes remotely already for my PhD program here at Concordia. So it was really intense, and I was feeling like life could just vanish, and like it was so acute, like the uncertainty of life. And I always wanted to produce something with my family, like to have this lineage somehow perpetuated as an archive as well. And so it's basically focused on my grandmother's life. My grandmother, Jurema. Jurema is an Afro-Brazilian name, and it's related to the first Brazilian religion from the northeast of Brazil, which is connected with shamanism and syncretism with Afro diaspora as well. And it's also this really crazy narrative of dreams inside of dreams, like when you have various dreams in a row. So it's basically like my grandmother dreaming about her own life in a really symbolic way. And these are some frames of the last work that I have been developing that I just began to produce in Mexico as part of the last residency that I did. Almost all of those works were done in artists in residencies. So they also have a really collective approach because usually I collaborate with people that I connect during the artist in residencies. So if I'm not able to connect with anyone, probably nothing will come up, like, because I also need to connect with people in order to create something, usually, like, especially video art. So this piece is actually just one scene of my next short movie. This scene is called The Syncretic Centaur, and it's basically a tattoo performance in which I am getting the centaur tattooed in my chest, the centaur as a signifier of both Saint George and Ogun, which is a Orisha, an Afro-diasporian entity, and how they both convey the same spiritual being in Brazil. And I also bring to this narrative the idea of the centaur being part of the archive of Latin America. Like back then in the 16th century, there were some books called monstroriums. The monstroriums were books that would depict the colonized people alongside mythological beings and beasts. So like some indigenous nations of Brazil were present in these monstroriums, and they were alongside the centaur, for example. And the centaur itself was a symbol of barbarism, of barbarians. So they were kind of like the colonizers were creating this narrative that colonized people were the same as barbarians, and they were basically like spreading this colonial knowledge for European people that were not in the colonies. So they were kind of like teaching how to colonize minds through the monstroriums. So this work is really about like bringing back the monstroriums and also the implications of this colonial spectrum in contemporary times and in my own identity and body. And that's it. Thank you. If you want to know more about my work, you can always access my website or reach out to me through my email. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rodrigo. So now we're gonna move on to John Latour, artist, teaching and research librarian here at the Webster Library at Concordia University. So all yours, John.
Great, thank you very much, Santiago. Before I begin, I'd just like to say thank you to Santiago for inviting me to be on this panel. It's great to be here with these wonderful artists. And I also wanted to thank the organizers for thinking aloud, for making such an interesting program over 3 days. And of course, I'd like to thank the wonderful people at the Fourth Space, Doug and Jax, for all their great support. So this presentation is going to look at retrofictions, refictions, and fictions as a collaborative artist publication and as a creative space made possible by the erasure of history. And I provided somewhere an example of the publication that I'll be talking about, and you're welcome to come check it out afterwards. I'll begin by giving some background context to my art practice and then talk about how retrofictions came about. It was initially conceived of and published as a single volume in 2012. And a few years later, I decided to revisit the book and transform it into a 3-volume publication. And then I'll end my presentation by talking about how this project relates to today's panel. And I can't seem to move my slides forward. Let me see. There we go. Great. So at the top of the slide, I hope you can see there's a quote: "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." And this is an opening line from a 1953 novel by L.P. Hartley called The Go-Between. And I think it's such a wonderful quote, so much so, it was like a touchstone for me for my publication. and I included it on the inside flaps of my publication in English and French. For me, it suggests that the past coexists with the present and that the boundaries between the past and the present are very fluid. My own art practice is informed and guided by a number of open-ended questions. What is this thing we call the past? How is our experience of it mediated through objects, images, and texts? And can we, or how can we, communicate with the past? To provide some context to Rétrofictions, I should mention that I've been using vintage found photographs as source material in my art practice since 2007. I typically find these and other photographs in antique stores and flea markets, so they date from the 1950s or earlier, and often depict individuals or small groups of persons, and probably friends and family members, in informal settings. So I collect the photographs if I find them visually interesting, but I only use them in my practice if the subjects are unknown. So I'm interested in the sense of history these images evoke, but I also acknowledge that their individual histories are lost. To accentuate this sense of loss, and in an attempt to obscure them, I apply flecks of white paint over the figures. And I believe this whiting out serves a creative cross purpose. Inasmuch as it draws attention to the fading of subjects over time, it makes the individual stand out to the viewer. For me, these figures flicker between presence and absence. And you'll see the titles of my modified photographs are very generic and very descriptive. Thank you. And that's because when coming up with titles, I like to kind of imagine myself as an archivist, a closet archivist who likes to assign very descriptive titles to things, anonymous photographs. Another criteria that helps me to decide what photographs to collect and use in my art practice is whether or not I'm curious about who the people are in the photographs, why someone chose a particular moment to take their picture, and what happened to these people after the pictures were taken. And of course, these are answers we cannot know. So after having worked with found photographs for a few years, I tried writing short stories to accompany them, an attempt to fill in the historical gaps with fiction. As it turns out, writing fiction is very hard. So I was very unsatisfied with the results. My stories resemble too much the work I produce in my page art, and I'll come to this in a moment. So this is actually where Rétrofictions came in early 2012. I approached a few people I knew or knew of to see if they'd be interested in participating in an experimental art project. I presented them with a number of my modified photographs, invited them to choose one and to write a short story or other text in response to their selection. It was really an experiment, as only one of the people I contacted really wrote short stories, but I felt all the authors had interesting writing practices. My collaborators included Jennifer Allen, who's an editor, Marina Endicott, a novelist and short story writer, Cynthia Hammond, an art historian and artist, and for people at Concordia, you may know her as an art history professor. Leah Nakanishi, an independent filmmaker, Eduardo Ralikas, an art historian, and Jean-Éric Riopel, a poet. Each author had carte blanche as to the subject and language of their story, and they were free to ignore the titles I assigned to each image. So in exchange for the text, I would publish it in Rétrofictions and give them the original photograph. So there was kind of an exchange, image for a text. So I was very happy that everyone said yes to my invitation, and I was delighted with the results once they started coming in. So for this presentation, I'll highlight two short stories, but at the end of the presentation, I'll provide links to where you can download all of the stories. The first one is Leah Nakanishi's 3-page personal effects, and it's written from the perspective of a summer student who's tasked with cataloging artifacts for a museum, including the personal belongings of a World War I veteran. So this is her short story, and this is the original photograph that she worked from. In her story, Nakanishi writes, canteen, gas mask, shaving kit. Things the museum already has in triplicate. Vaguely annoyed, she takes out the metal shaving kit and gets a waft of old man smell as she opens it. The razor's knurled handle is suitably masculine, the blade still fixed in place, predictably rested. She removes the little mirror from its ragged brown velvet pouch, catching her reflection for an instant. Turning it over, she finds a wallet-sized black and white snapshot nestled safely against it. In that moment, she gets a flash of recognition across time and space, as bright as the light in the mirror. Inexplicably, the student is compelled to steal the photograph and ultimately finds the theft too heavy a burden on her conscience. Edward Ralikas's 6-page short story, Roland Barthes, Reflections on Two Women on a Canoe, 1934, is presented as a translator's note. And this is the image that Ralikas worked from. In his note, the translator discusses Roland Barthes' archives in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and references the earliest known analysis by Barthes of a photograph, described here as two women on a canoe. Barthes writes, "Photography has two temporalities, the time of my looking and the time of the photograph that looks back. How does it come about that I experience a backward glancing time while being conscious that my looking is always anchored in the continuous present? I stare at the two women on the boat. I look away. I look again. They're still looking at me. Every time my eyes fall upon theirs, there's a flash of recognition. We glance at one another here and now." Several years after publishing Rétrofictions, I reached out to all the authors and asked them if I could play around with their texts. I should say that in addition to erasing photographs, my art practice includes using white paint to erase words and entire passages of text from reprinted novels of the 19th century. The few words that remain on the selected pages create new and fragmented stories. Often, the meaning of these new texts remain ambiguous. So in 2018, and with the help of Jeff Kulak, who was my design collaborator for Rétrofictions, I whited out most of the words on the cover and title page of the original book and renamed it Refictions. Similarly, I partially erased the contributions of the authors. So here you can see that my intervention in Nakonechny's personal effects left only two phrases. She looks back and war is a mirror. In 2019, I contacted my collaborators again to see if I could erase their entire stories to create a third and final volume. With their permission, and as you can see in these sample pages, I removed all the text from the book except for the word fictions, which served as the title of this volume. The contributors to Rétrofictions explore relationships between textual and photograph subjects, but I can't help notice other parallels or patterns between them. For example, both Nakonechny and Ralikas make use of the expression "a flash of recognition" at some point in their respective stories. They do so in ways that blur traditional, temporal, spatial, and subjective boundaries. Furthermore, both Nakonechny and Ralikas make reference to archives in their stories, which I thought was especially relevant given today's panel. As a real-life librarian, and as an imaginary archivist, I appreciate the archival thread that weaves its way through each narrative. And more broadly speaking, I think the fictions that make up Rétrofictions show how the erasure of history opens up a creative space for new inquiries. The end. Thank you very much. And I've given some links if you're interested in downloading the Rétrofictions, Refictions, and Fictions. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Now we're gonna hear from Dr. KG Guttman, who's a performer, artist, and a fellow artist in residence in the intermedia program, part of the Department of Studio Arts. So I'll pass on the mic to you.
Thank you, Santiago, and thanks for the invitation to the fourth space and to the colloquium and to join everyone around the table for this. rich discussion. I'm going to take up this notion that the panel has proposed on techniques of placemaking. So just briefly, I'm a queer white settler artist of Jewish and Irish descent, and I did my MFA worlds ago here at Concordia. I'm going to speak about this work that will be presented in 2024 in Montreal and Laval, called Dette sans raison, is the river at your door. It's a site-situated performance, and the photos that I will present are photos in progress with the performer Rob Abubo. So situated performance and practice is research that puts emphasis on one's entangled position with the immediacy and complexity of where we are now. Oneself is a material discursive situation, aligning perhaps not with the traditional framework such as the national, but with the multiple intimate connections of the local. In Dette sans raison is the river at your door. I'm interested in how sight animates a performance and how performance animates a site. Art historian Mi-Wan Kwan writes, our understanding of sight has shifted from a fixed physical location to somewhere or something constituted through social, economic, cultural, and political processes. Sight is multiple. Dette sans raison is a performance designed for one person at a time and has to take place in a residential site, an apartment, a sublet, a house. The performance consists of an audio recording that the participant can download and listen with headphones, and a small package that I prepare of materials that will be unpacked to the rhythm of the audio. The participant must organize themselves through their own means to visit the home of a person they know very little or at all. This should be someone outside of their network or circle of acquaintances, a stranger. I provide a letter of introduction for the guest to give to the potential host. The participant will need to be alone in the living room or kitchen of this person's house for about an hour. It's preferable that the visit takes place during the day. And I want to avoid simple voyeuristic intentions with the piece by limiting the access of the host's home to one room, establishing consent beforehand, and informing the host that the performance will focus on introspective somatic exercises. For instance, the guest will be closing their eyes quite a bit. The performance explores the connections between embodiment and placemaking, how concepts of embodiment affect and produce concept of territory. Territory is not just a geographical notion, but from Foucault, a juridico-political one, an area controlled by a certain kind of power. So a living room or a kitchen is already coded with cultural, class, and aesthetic signifiers, facilitating a deep link to the broader economic and political order. Domestic spaces are infused with ambient codes of conduct appropriate to each space. So the force of law embedded in municipal codes, title registrars, etc., sit quietly behind these private spheres and regulate our most intimate of spaces. I draw on a teacher that I've been recently studying with, a Nigerian author and speaker, Bayo Akomolafe, who writes on the subject of reimagining activism, to go beyond justice and the terms of that, the language of justice, and speaking truth to power, to opening up other spaces of power with and queering formulations and configurations of hope. So performance in a private residence is neither specifically official nor permitted, but not disallowed either. It shifts the terms of engagement that a public institutionalized event. I'm not dismissing the importance of publics per se, and their many potentialities, but this minor mode of encounter that the performance embraces is aimed at something more tentative and emerging, more insecure, a trembling alive contract between myself, a guest, and a host. No value guaranteed. So I wonder, and love to hear from you, what you think this initial gesture might do, inviting oneself over to another person's house for the sake of an experimental art event. It's a negotiation with strangeness, with difference, and I cannot open my house without creating relations to my body. Hospitality is experiments with embodiment. When one becomes host, one's home and one's body merge a bit, In order to open my home, I'm compelled to open my relation to my own potential and capacity to apprehend the not yet, the stranger guest, and to be exposed, to be seen. I'm hosting my relation to the site itself, a field of temporalities and materials and movement. In Of Hospitality, philosopher Jacques Derrida addresses the notion of the foreigner, the stranger, l'étranger, as a key notion for thinking through what's at stake in hospitality. According to Derrida, the host sustains her identity as a host through acts of hospitality. What this implies is the ability on the part of the host to receive a foreign presence within the home, but not lose her identity as host. So Derrida defines the role of host as fundamentally constituted through the capacity to host difference. And there's a tension: at what point can you welcome difference and yet maintain a coherent identity of personhood? And the guest, I think the guest is suddenly aware of their foreignness the minute they enter. Their strangeness erupts in the eyes of the host stranger. The guest does not know the stranger who has allowed her to enter, but she also doesn't know the stranger she will become in the encounter. So the feeling in guesting and hosting is palpable as territory, discipline, disassembling and affecting. In the audio track of Dette, raison, I ask participants to breathe deeply. I invite the guest to look at the room from each corner for specific durations, run their hands back and forth along the surfaces of walls. I ask them to imagine themselves looking at themselves from another point in the room. I ask them to imagine their grandmother or grandfather or their parents' grandparents in the room with them. I invite them to close one eye and cover one eye, gaze into the darkness of the covered one eye while viewing the room's light and texture with the other. In short, I'm employing technologies of the sensorium and imaginaries. So however cliche and inadequate it might seem to connect to one's breath and to play with sensorium at this point in late capitalism, always in danger of being co-opted into mindful productivity, experimenting with the senses remains an incredible technology to attune to the mystery of being a body, a way not to instrumentalize ourselves and to give way to indebtedness of the ecologies we are part of, the indeterminate qualities of corporeal experience. Experimenting with the sensorium engages critically with the supposed clear cut between inside and outside that our Cartesian epistemologies hold us tight to. Speculatively, I think with somatic scholars like Dr. Angel Acosta, indigenous choreographer Emily Johnson, who speak about when one focuses on one's own breath, one is breathing through others and memories of others, that all corporeal investment is a kind of memory work and a kind of multiplicity. At one point in the performance, I ask the guest to fetch a glass of water from the host's kitchen. I ask that the guest hold this glass of water and imagine letting go and the glass slipping out and falling and breaking. The idea is to feel the trembling of the relationship, the object animated through where forces of guesting and hosting meet. So to end, situated performance and practice attempts to interrupt unbounded autonomy that modernity gives us by embracing the specificity of relations, encumbrances, duties, and agencies through a minor mode of encounter. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiji. So now we're gonna move on to Cristo Rifo, who's an artist and MFA graduate researcher, also in the intermediate program here at Concordia University. So I'll pass you that.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi. While Santiago is doing that, I just want to take my time to thank everyone for coming to see this panel. I'm closing, so that's kind of a pressure. I love everyone's work. We're amazing. And I already see some connections with my own work. So I think that's going to be a great conversational piece. Maybe.
I had been going around using this model that I have explained to you.
Okay, my name is Cristo Rifo. As it was said, I'm a MFA researcher, and I'm just going to start my presentation. For the past 13 years, I've been hacking machines and working around the idea of light and memory. This particular piece is called Archaeology of Light. If you turn your head a little bit to the right, you will see that an image is being formed slowly. Then if you see a little bit closer, you see that there are the Twin Towers in the USA. The images work on devices. So this particular device, we're going to see it work in different parts of the presentation, but as you can see, it destructs images. This piece in particular was made found footage. I live in Buenos Aires for many years, and in that city, I found thousands of images in the floor. And because I have so many slides, I could make pieces like this one, in which I make relationships between the images in shape, form, and concept. So the machines were created so the images could dialogue with each other. And on top of the dialogue of the image itself, there's also the dialogue of the device, of the hack device. In this case, they're a species as a kind of sun clock. And as you see now, an image is being formed in the sun clock. And the images are formed first with the image being projected, and then there's a special dust inside the clocks, and the dust has a photoluminescent component that allows the images to be burned into the material, and then the device turns and destroys the image. This is not a performance, this is an installation. It does it infinite times. It does it like for hours. There's a selection of about 150 slides. So the images are in constant dialogue with each other. And what I try to do is to tell the story of the American continent, north and south, in a more poetical and like abstract way. So you see now another image is being formed, and there's 3 clocks. The central clock has a specific time frame, so it presents the subject, and then the other clocks follow the subject. So let's say if we're talking about music, the center circle will be like a white note, and then the other ones will be like black notes. That's why they're black. This is like a side joke for myself. But see, so the center one is white and the other ones are black. You saw it now with the lights on. That's not normally how the piece is shown, but I wanted to show it in the documentation so you can understand the space. And this is, as I was saying, for me, it was a way to understand memory and to understand my own history as a Latin American. The next piece is going to make a little bit of a jump. And it's a piece that I made in 2017. It's called Wind. And it's a really, I think it changed the narrative with the one that we just saw, 2020, the other one is 2017. And it's the first time that I start to work with photoluminescence. And this piece, I would say, is one of the most more charged political pieces that I have made in my career. This piece consists in 3 photographic enlargers that are set in line. And these photographic enlargers are hacked as the other piece. And they work projecting the portraits of the 3 people that have burned themselves in Chile for political reasons. The respective portraits are of Sebastián Acevedo, Claudio Miño, y Marco Cuadra. And I pick these portraits and these people because for me, they compress Chilean history like an aleph, like a point in history that reflects all the points of history at the same time. and the images are being projected in another version of this photoluminescent dust. And the difference is that they're open. So the boxes are open, and I made a note in the installation so people can know that they can touch the piece. And now the images are being projected. Sebastián Acevedo burned himself in dictatorship, Eduardo Miño in democracy, and Marco Cuadra in democracy. One in 83, the other next one in 2001, and the other one in 2014. So for me, it was a way to understand how history repeats itself in ways in which the state pressures people until they become to dust. Now the images are being projected. You can see the portraits of these three men. And at some point, the machines are going to turn off. And when the machines turn off, the portraits are engraved. And as I was saying, I let people touch the pieces. So they destroy the images. The machines will start again, and then we will engrave it again and again. But I really like the idea that when people went to their houses, they will have ashes in their hands. And I was always imagining that they arrive at home, they go to bed, and they turn off the lights, and they see the clothes covered with this dust because it doesn't leave. You need to wash your clothes. And so I'm going to make a 30-second stop, because before the next piece, I want to show a video that kind of shifted my career. And I was just going to talk about a specific event. So I'm Chilean, and with a group of other people that were working in Chile, we're working about politics, about memory, and we're a group of people, just to mention a few, Luna Costa, Paula Besa Pailamilla, and we were working, everyone together in this kind of idea of something that was about to happen. And in 2019, we have a revolution in Chile that it was really beautiful at the beginning, and we were really hopeful. We were changing the constitution after the protests, and you can Google this, but it didn't went well. Right now, my country is in a complete upheaval, and where the process are not going well, and now the extreme right is taking over the process. It's really sad. And everything happened in between me moving to Canada. And in that period of time, I kind of stopped my political production. I was like trying to understand what I was going to do next. And I was searching for a concept that was more holistic and could interpret politics, sociology, anthropology, and I don't know, like biology and all these different forms of knowledge, you know. And I arrived into cybernetics, and I was into this, trying to, in a way, escape politics. And I found this video that I'm going to play for you. It's just 3 minutes and I really want you to watch.
I hope you remember all about the cybernetic model of the viable system, because this model deeply underlies the story I want to tell you now. We shan't see the model again, so let's take a quick rehearsal of it. Here were the parts of the organization, which I called Systems 1, and you remember about their cybernetic interaction with the outside world. Those systems will go into oscillation, we said, unless there is a system 2, which is this, intended precisely to damp that oscillation. Then we have our first corporate management level, the total organization management, dealing with the inside of the system, right here and now. And in contrast to that, system 4, dealing with the future and the outside. And then the task of top management, right up there, system 5, perceived as mainly being about monitoring the homeostat that connects 3 and 4. That's how it was. Now, the story that I want to tell you began in 1971, in the middle of the year. I had been going around using this model that I have explained to you in big companies, in agencies, in all sorts of places. And then I suddenly got a letter which very much changed my life. It was from the technical general manager of the State Planning Board of Chile. Remember, 1971, President Allende was in office. He remarked in this letter that he had studied all my works, he had collected a team of scientists together, and would I please come and take it over? I could hardly believe it, as you can imagine. But this was to start me on a journey which made me travel 8,000 miles over and over and over again. I was commuting between London and Santiago for 2 years. While that model of the viable system's in your mind, let me tell you what happened when I first explained it to President Allende himself. Allende was a doctor, a medical doctor, as you may know. And therefore, it was very easy to explain the model to him in terms of neurocybernetics, as the way of controlling the body. And then I went into the business of controlling the state. And so I said to him, let us suppose that these elements of the state are the big departments of state, like the foreign affairs and the economy and home affairs, so on. And then we'll have those, and the following things will happen, and then we must have a system 2, and I built it up on a piece of paper lying on the table between us. Then a system 3 and a system 4, and I got that far. And then I got to system 5, and I drew a big histrionic breath. And I said, I was going to say, this compañero presidente is you. Before I could say it, he suddenly smiled very broadly, and he said, ah, system 5, at last, the people. That was a pretty powerful thing to happen. It had a very big influence on me. I can't go into that aspect, the political aspect, in this program. It's not what it's about. But I'm sure you'll bear in mind that I don't have to go and work in places where I don't want to be. And so when I got to Chile, I determined to make data flow instantaneous. Never mind.
So I cross upon this video. This person is Stafford Beer. I was searching about cybernetic management, and then I put this video trying to escape Chilean politics, and then he suddenly says, Salvador Allende, Chile 71, and I'm like, what is this, you know? And I went into this wormhole of like 2-3 years to research about cybernetics, what they are, and how they entangle with Chilean history, because apparently there's a huge chapter of history with Project Cybersyn, that is this management project that he was trying to explain. This image here, right here, is the control room of Project Cybersyn that was created in 71, as he was explaining really quickly. And he explained the algorithms that inspire Project Cybersyn. And I don't have too much time to go into it, so I'm just going to jump into my current research that is after all these years of kind of searching. And you were remembering that he was talking about the viable system and the system 5, and he makes this joke about Allende. So this is the name of the piece, called Sistema 5, Non-Human Determinations. As my previous pieces, this is also a hack machine, but in this case, it's a hack microscope. The microscope itself has agency. It has the ability to move itself in the 3 axes and to make decisions. To make the decisions, it uses artificial intelligence that is inspired in the viable system. That's why it's called System 5. And there's also a next layer. I always try to work in layers in my pieces. And this layer is the microcosmos. As you see right now, there's a live transmission from the microscope that's being projected in one of these big screens. And you're seeing right now a nematode. A nematode is one of the most common microorganisms in the planet. They're like microscopic worms. And in the other screen, you see large projection of terrains that I fly with drones. And I try to put the drones like in the same perspective as the microscope to make this relationship between the macroscopic and the microscopic. What happened just now is the microscope moved by itself because the algorithms told them you should move to another vector. The piece is divided in 4 vectors, and in each vector, the machine is using computer vision algorithms to kind of understand what is happening in each of these sectors. And based on the information, it takes decisions deciding if it's going to feed the microorganisms or it's not going to feed the microorganisms in different regions. it's an experiment about governability. It's an experiment about utopian systems. And it's a direct quote of a moment in time that this is how I see cybernetics. I see it as a moment in time in which technology was more hopeful. You know, right now we're so scared about AI, and it's not because AI is a bad thing, but it's because it's hijacked by capitalist ideas, and we just see the end of the world in it. We don't see a better of our own lives. We see just destruction of the planet. So I try to take this concept of taking ideas from the past for the future. And this is what I kind of obsess with cybernetics. And this, like my passing in Concordia, I think it kind of really inspired this shift of like these hard politics. They're still there, you know, you see the politics in this piece, but I think I went to another direction. The image that you're seeing here, that's the computer that is showing all the data. That is a direct quote of one of the computers from the project Cybers, and I kind of make a reproduction of the objects. And again, I don't work alone in these pieces. I work with a team. This piece is part of my research with Lila Sujir as my master thesis. That's going to be presented in May next year if you want to come. And I will just say that it was a great experience to kind of change my perspective on things and be sharing with all of you in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristo. I feel like well, we have some time. I think we're going to open it to some questions that John will start kind of to start conversation here among the table, and then we'll open up to the audience. But you know, it's been great hearing everyone's presentations and seeing so much of the kind of the overlaps in questioning and exploring political histories, personal archives, you know, seeking within our communities, also in building trust, building affection, connection as a key element to create this I guess present and also future possibilities of creation, of embodying you know, spaces and constructing new ways of being, I guess, in the world. So thank you for your presentations, and I'll pass the mic again to
Great. Thank you everyone on the panel for these amazing presentations. My mind is slightly blown with all of these interesting and diverse practices. So I have the enviable or unenviable challenge of getting the ball rolling with some questions. So as Santiago mentioned, I'll start with a few questions and then maybe open it up to the group, and then maybe come back and we'll see how it goes. So here it goes. Maybe my first question I'll direct towards Pamela and Santiago. It's a very specific question, but then I'll try and open it up to everybody else on the panel. I'll start about talking about the role of the curator in residence at VCR. And I think the role of curators has really gone through a lot of changes recently. You know, in the past, we could kind of see curators as caretakers of collections or organizers of exhibitions. But I think what I'm seeing with VCR is new directions for curators. And I'm just wondering how you see the role of a curator within VCR, or perhaps outside of VCR, in light of recent years. Does that make sense?
I wonder if you want to start. Okay.
Thank you, John, it's true, for just pointing that out. The curators in libraries and archives isn't really something that's talked about, even though it's always been, collection development, but it's important to think of who makes those collections and how they're, not only how they're kept, but how they're built and who they're for. And so, I don't know, I feel like this is the curator in residence program. Like, when we started it 3 years ago, it's been a bit every year, it modifies a little. And this year, I think we really got a good model in hand, and realizing that the selections that are made by our curators, they end up in classrooms. They end up by, researchers sometimes point out like, oh, that's so cool, you have this film. I didn't know like that you had this. And so we're seeing this kind of continuation in it. Like it comes full circle sometimes. And yeah, I don't know. Did I answer?
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, when I started, let's say, the residency last year at Celebro, there was this struggle of thinking of myself as a curator, just because it's never been kind of a role that I've embraced or I've explored before. But I think within that process, and also with the residency with BCR, I've been seeing this role in a sense of allowing or bringing together different conversations and putting together different works that create a type of dialogue around kind of greater social issues or environmental issues as well. So for me, I think the role has been more, and I think it was a little bit talked about as well, the sense of creating meaningful connections within the community that's around me. And I think that's kind of my focus right now as well, in terms of a curatorial approach in creating meaningful connections and finding these points of intersectionality of our practices and hoping for that to open new opportunities or new spaces for diverse voices to also be present within different collections, different archives, and different institutions. So I think for me, it's been more of this research-based process within that role, and yeah, kind of seeing the community around to create new storytellings and new projects, but always focus on the meaningful in the trust and the affection, the connection, that as a key role to bring practices and voices and artists together. I think that's what I've been seeing.
Pamela, do you have something to add? No, okay.
But actually, it's been a bit of that also with VCR. I mean, Pamela showed a bit of the VCR space, and it's been more of this conversation where we come together, very informal, to talk about personal experiences, our own communities, and finding points of connection. So I think the VCR residency has really opened up for that space for conversations to happen in a very informal but critical way.
I know some of my favorite parts is, yeah, we've had some really great discussions, and yeah, it's I know it's like, should we record them? And I was like, nah, we'll just present it.
Yeah.
I kind of think the role of the curator has really opened up, and you know, there's much more higher expectations also of curators now to be more socially involved or engaged or aware of you know, diversity and inclusion and access. I'm curious to know, because I think there are other artists on the panel as well who self-identify as curators, and I'm wondering if they would be interested in talking about their own vision of artist, curator, or curator now.
Thank you for the question. I think like everything is overlapping nowadays. Like, actually, I think like as we are questioning this Western way of imagining the world and envisioning the world, like naturally these things will overlap because they used to overlap in the past. They were not compartmentalized as they are nowadays. Knowledge was not as divided. So I believe that we are actually relearning the importance of transdisciplinarity and being open to, you know, like this connection between mind and body, spirituality and rationality. Like we are disrupting these visions that have been so ingrained in the way that we learn and we are taught in general. And I do think like being a curator in Latin America is really different from here. The first thing, of course, is like the precarity in Latin America, how like we really struggle to thrive in this neoliberal system. We kind of like emulate this system, but we are not paid. We don't have like good working conditions, and we do have a lot of resistance, and we do have a lot of amazing projects going on, but they lack funding, they lack interest sometimes, because like the population is not structured like to engage with art and culture. The majority of people, they are struggling to survive and they have other priorities. So like, it's really hard to create interest in Latin America. And I think like the so-called global South, like, or once colonized countries, we have similar struggles in these terms. Like for me, for example, coming here, it's really different, like how I perceive the interest for culture, right? Like, and how like it's way more easy to access fundings and yeah, to just like have an audience interested in culture in general. I do think like the curators in the last 20 years, let's say, the curators have been more gatekeepers somehow, like, but more aware of this role as gatekeepers. And so like they will think about the diversity, they will think about how to expand these networks for people that cannot achieve these structures. If they are good curators. But of course, like I think, so I see myself in this role right now. Like I see myself as constantly trying to build bridges with the Latin American community and, you know, like how to place myself as a Latinx person here, but also like not forgetting that my trajectory is not individual, and that like the fact that I am thriving here can't be detached from my role as someone that is ultimately a gatekeeper as well, that I am opening opportunities now, like for people that are there. So like I see myself as you said, like hacking machines, but I'm hacking the machine of the system. So I think like the creators can be like that too, like we can be aware of how to, you know, navigate the system and subvert it, update it. Yeah, I don't think like, I don't know, I'm speaking a lot, so maybe you wanna.
But I think also in this blending of roles, like Rodrigo's mentioning, I feel like sometimes for BIPOC or queer individuals, because of the gaps also that are present in institutions, in archives, I think sometimes it comes to us to also opening up these spaces for ourselves and for our own communities. So this role of also thinking and collaborating back within our own, you know, fellow Latinos that are still living there. I think that's also an interesting way of approaching curatorial practices and our own roles as artists. Just continuing that connection and that communication and the dialogue between the different narratives that emerge. So, yeah.
I think I heard Christo say you're not a curator. Is that a position, or is it possible that you're a curator of your own art practice? And maybe that is a question to the artists who don't identify as curators, but do you curate your own art practices?
For sure. And I would say that besides being an artist, I'm an educator. And when I do class, when I do pedagogy, I think there's a lot of curation of the students' work. And I think I'm not saying that curators treat their people like students, you know, like, but there's a thing about like guiding processes. And even if the artists are not present, I love when I see good curators, you know, and good curations, you know, when you see that there's a narrative and the pieces are put in a way that they're dialoguing. And in that sense, of course, I take a lot of that. Like, I think in a good universe, there's a healthy relationship between artists and curators, and we learn from each other, you know, and I think I have learned a lot from curators and a lot about really well curated exhibitions. You know, there's something that I love is when curators have the access to like galleries, like city galleries, when you have like works from 200 years ago, 300 years ago, you know, 50 years ago, and they put in dialogue all pieces with contemporary pieces. When it's well done, it's just beautiful, you know. You see, and I think it's because it's kind of my subject, as I was presenting, kind of a way to compress time and see the points in which things correlate when things are not correlating. Why are they not correlating? You know, what are these tension points? And I think good curation does that. And I feel every artist has to do curation, as you were saying, of their own pieces and of their own ideas. This idea of less is more, but a bit more complex, because sometimes it's backwards, sometimes it's the half of it, sometimes it's just that, but you put in a mixer and you try to understand the flux of your brain, I would say.
KG, do you identify as a curator or?
No, but I would agree with Christo. Like, I put my voice in dialogue with other voices, and big part of my current research is a practice I call visiting, and I visit work of other artists, and I really spend time with other artists' works because it's something I did at the very start of studying art, and then I found I had less and less time to really be with other people's practices, so I've integrated it back in. So it's a very important aspect to, yeah, be in dialogue. Yeah.
I do find with the project that you discussed, there is kind of a role though that you play to create this context. And I wonder, maybe curator is not the right word, but you create this sort of context with your guest host. And do you see that as a kind of an orchestrator of an activity, a social interaction?
So I just see it as my practice,
Okay.
right? I see artists as art practice as configuring situations and yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, thank you. What I might do before I start jumping into specific questions like that one, I'll open up the floor to questions to see if people have questions or comments that they have for our panel. We have a microphone, possibly. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. As the students that I give workshops to know, I will fill the void. Oh, somebody, that could have been a wave or a question. No, okay. I have a question. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm curious about this separation between like North America and South America. We were talking, somebody was mentioning this like division of knowledge around the world. Can you explain, like, what do you think, what do you attribute that to? And how can we like fix that?
Division of knowledge. Do you wanna-
I can jump in after you. You wanna-
No, you start.
It's a tricky one. I think like, I mean, we are already like discussing a lot about decoloniality. Like I don't identify myself as decolonial. For example, I don't identify myself as a decolonial researcher, because before identifying myself as a decolonial researcher, I think we need to first create an environment in academia and institutions in general that allow us to change our mindsets and allow us to really learn, how to dismantle these structures in our minds. I think like as the system that is given to us nowadays is still really rooted in colonial structures. What we are doing, I believe, more in a counter-hegemonic or countering narratives. So we are first like addressing the problems, the historical problems that created all these divisions. We are like understanding how territorial like separations, frontiers are fictions that were created from the colonial spectrum. They are just lines on a map, like they are divisions that were created, those like specific national building purposes and political purposes. So like I think we live in really interesting times in the end, because we have the chance to question, we have the chance to be critical and to think together. And we need everyone to engage in these discussions so we can actually have a change. Because I think in the past, everything was really segregated and we couldn't allow for diverse voices to interact, to exchange. So like this is actually a really interesting moment that we are able to do that. And we are slowly, I think like we are towards this decoloniality. We are not living it yet, but it's a good step like that we are doing, like that we are thinking about that. And in the sense, like we need to be aware as well, like how to be mindful of different backgrounds, different trajectories, and how these trajectories will inform our positionalities in the world, right? Like there is a division, a clear division of opportunities, of how societies informed and created possibilities for certain individuals to thrive. So like all these differences and these power relations are at play right now, and we can see them. I think like we are seeing something being unveiled, and this is the first step. So like we are unveiling the history and this official narrative that was created by the Western society and by European societies. And now like the other voices, multiple voices are speaking like about like how I see the American continent as part of this counter-hegemonic approach. I am a Abiyalan. So Abiyala is a Kuna term. Kuna is an indigenous nation located in what we call Panama and Colombia right now. And they call the whole Americas Abiyala. And it's a way to think about the territory in a spiritual level, and also in a way of connecting with a sense of kinship with nature, with the animals, with the birds specifically. So like they address like the three main parts of America. So like North, Central, and South America as the main birds that inhabit these territories, and they are representatives of these territories, but ultimately they are all connected and they are part of this big collective of birds. So I believe in this approach because it's more about unifying, not homogenizing, but speaking together and exchanging instead of separating and reinforcing separation. So yeah, like I think we can be more mindful and aware of like the terms that we use, and to, yeah, I think I answered.
No, and I think also to be aware of the gaps that are still happening here in a lot of the collections and archives and institutions here in Canada. I mean, you know, the fact that the Latin American migration has been going on for many years. It's not, but there's still this lack of representation in a lot of these archives. So I think something to do is still continuing in highlighting these practices, the Latin American community, the queer community, and that intersection. To me, at least, that's what kind of pushes this side of my practice, and that's why my interest in also opening up my artistic practice to other voices and kind of creating those dialogues. And you know, opening up opportunities for this to talk about that, and eventually including some of these practices within archives for now of the VCR. But you know, also part of that research led me to look into the long history of the National Gallery Soviet Award, where there was only one other Latino that was longlisted many years ago, Rafael Lozano Hemmer. And that kind of also, I would say, it was part of the VCR research that led to this, and eventually my collaborator and I were second and third, I guess, Latino nominated, longlisted in that national award. And I mean, we're not, you know, the only Latinos kind of working in a contemporary context at all. And there has been many other generations that have been opening other doors. So I think, you know, this search and this search of keep questioning these roles that we have and these institutions where we're at, to open up more of these possibilities of dialogues and including our voices and our narratives within that. I think that allows also for creating these different connections with the Global South in many ways, especially when the different trajectories that Rodrigo's mentioning, it also highlights different stories of our diaspora, right? Everyone has very unique ways and timelines of how long they've been here and how they got here as well, and for what purpose as well, right?
I just wanted to make a small mention and show an art piece. This is from the 50s, late 40s, from Joaquín Torres Garcia. This is a Latin American artist from Uruguay. And he's one of the first ones that kind of make this image like famous, in which he did a super simple exercise. he's subverted the map. Why is it north and why we're south? You know, why the superpowers put the glove in this specific position when in space there's no up or right or down or left. It's just an abstract conception. So I would say the notion of us and against them, north against south, is something, it's kind of binary right now, and we're trying to understand it. It's a dialogue. Just this week, I have a really interesting conversation, and with someone was saying, actually, we're not, he's from Africa, and he was saying, actually, there's a lot of like theory people talking about that it's not so much about the north, because there are people in Central Africa or maybe in Northern Africa that are in a lot of distress, and they don't want to be called the North. So he told me they're talking about minorities and majorities, saying the minority, the so-called first world, because they're small compared to the rest of the world, and then the majority that is everyone else. And I found it really interesting how he kind of confronted this idea of North and South. He's doing the same thing, Joaquin Torres. I think it's a constant dialogue of how we, as you were saying, like host and the guest, like how we confront this thing. And me as a Latin American artist that is currently, I've been here in North America for 3 years. It's really interesting to see how things are here, especially when we are so close to the empire, you know, to the USA, and see how the closeness to the empire, it kind of affects everything around it. And for the first time, I really understand American politics, you know, the USA. And it kind of changed my perspective on how I see my own politics, not in good or bad way, just more in a more complete way, because it's really complex.
I was like to echo the complexity, and I want to go back to Rita Wong's comment at the panel just before us around, you know, the immediate context of how we're thinking through a thread line through this panel of Indigenous commitments to thinking through the social justice specificity of Canada. And I would say, to respond to this North-South language, that it's the complexity of wider coalitions, such as this panel, which is incredibly, has so many multiple commitments, and how to think connections that are emerging from receiving each person's presentation. So that's what I'm kind of occupied with, is being moved by the ways in which Latino folks, queer folks don't have access to certain opportunities, and how that moves through my activism and my collaboration in very different circles. And yeah, trying to think of this, the ways that coalitions are like heterogeneous coalitions are built, which are not easy and emerge. And so I'm really, if I think about the methodology of this colloquium, it seems so beautifully dispersed to then attend to emergent connections, which is very meaningful.
I'm wired now, apparently. I'm wired. No, I'm not. Yes, I am. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that question. Is there another question? Gary? Oh, we need a microphone. Oh, okay. I think we need a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarkable presentations. I thought they were fabulous. I think we're in a very fragile moment, and I don't want to talk about the fragility of the politics that you've talked about. I want to ask a question from a curatorial perspective, which is the relationship between material culture and immaterial culture. And the reason that I ask that is that we could think, you know, that saying that history is written by the winners, but history is also contained by the people who own all the stuff. And so with immaterial culture, with a lot of digital culture, it's technologically constrained to the present moment. Plus, it's produced at such a rate that it can be collected almost ad infinitum. So the question that I'm posing from a museological perspective, I guess, is how do you focus at a time where immaterial culture appears to be, or digital culture appears to be gaining an ascendancy, with the very idea that power and control and history is tied into material culture with objects, which are with artifacts, with archaeology.
Panel. That's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if I'm qualified to answer that question, but perhaps there are people who, curators. Intangible culture is actually a very interesting topic, and also material culture and restitution, and there's so much information around that. It's a little hard to parse. Is there someone? Yes.
Yeah, I don't have a broad perspective that I can speak to, but I could just say that I think I have a very different definition of power that is kind of presupposed in the question. I think power for me is in the micro, is in the way of practicing the world that one wants within the capabilities that one has. And so it's a manifestation that connects with others, but I know that, you know, the complexity of your question, I can't really speak to, but that's how I persist and resist, you know?
I think I can only answer from my own perspective as well. So what I am researching right now in terms of material and immaterial culture is related to the Tupinambá people from Brazil that used to be the major civilization prior to colonization. And I am focusing on reactivating the importance of their legacies to understand Brazilian art history nowadays. And their practices were connected and are connected because they are still resisting in Brazil with both spectra, with material and immaterial culture in everything, because like usually indigenous cosmovisions, they don't divide, they don't create this binary. So everything is connected, right? Like so their ritualistic practices and their material practices were connected. And I think, and also from my own perspective as an individual that tries to always reconnect with my spirituality, that's where I see more immateriality, like it's in the spiritual realm rather than in the digital world, for example, even though I also work with digital media. I think everything is connected actually, right? Like we can't forget about this interconnectivity of things. And like to just go back to the Tupinambá nation, right now, like I think to address the situation of museums, for example, and institutions and how they are struggling to navigate that. I think like the question of repatriation, for example, of artifacts of indigenous or Afro-diasporian artifacts, for instance, they have been on debate, right? Like, how can we do that? Respecting these cosmovisions, respecting these knowledges that are embedded with the objects. And then in terms of the Tupinambá people, for example, and many other indigenous nations, there is a sense of objects having life, having a soul, right? Like, and we, in the Western society or Westernized societies, this notion has been abstracted from the objects. We only see objects as a commodity and as a consumerist purpose. So I think we need to remind ourselves of the other meanings of objects, for example, so we can actually discuss the material nature that are related to these objects, for instance. And that's the case when we think about repatriation. The first repatriation of a Tupinambá artifact is happening next year in Brazil, for example. It took a long time of Tupinambá peoples negotiating with European collections that hold these artifacts. And finally, well, at least one of these featherwork mantles is returning to Brazil and to the agency of these people, right? Like, so what does it mean for these people to have this material practice that kind of like reenact their immaterial practices as well? Because the whole process of repatriating this object actually came from one of the leaders going to Europe constantly and actually analyzing this featherwork mantle, and then being able to connect with her ancestors in a spiritual level and understanding how this practice could be recreated nowadays. So this is an example of how a material practice, a material technique, when analyzed by someone that is connected and also in a material level, can disrupt this binary and teach us how to navigate this.
I mean, for me, with working with visual collections and material, for me is physical and analog and grounding. Always going back to the physical elements. We work with digital all the time and born digital, and I find yeah, going back to the physical is materials, and holding it is where we start our research. And even if it's 35mm slides, they're not archival objects. They're reproductions of reproductions. But there's just, and I see this especially with the students who have never, they don't even know what a slide is anymore. They've never seen a carousel projector. But there's this, they just love opening the drawers and browsing instead of the scrolling that we do. And that's sort of, yeah, that's where I see the distinction between material and immaterial.
I guess for me, I can talk about the experience of the exhibition that I put together at Céline Bourreau, which is a very unique. It's a garage space. So for me, the sense of, well, I guess with that process and that specific exhibition was more so to do with these connections that I was building at a distance with the collective that was at the time they were in Berlin, and the other ones were in Bogota, Colombia. So for me, there was this less care or preciousness for the material elements of their work. So they would just send me files, I printed them out, and they didn't really care too much about the material aspect of their work. That I still have them. It's not that they requested it back at any point, but to me it was less, we were less worried about the material aspect, the digital aspect, but more so the kind of dialogues that we were putting together in that specific space that we were putting together. So I think it's been mentioned, the sense of the decolonizing our thought process and the methodologies of how we see individual art making in putting this weight on a specific object or a specific digital file as well. I think finding ways of how we move away from or we explore identity beyond that in opening up new queer and communal dialogues and ways of making work and kind of putting ideas together more so than objects and specific files, I would say. Yeah.
Good. Oh, thank you. Technology there. Okay, thank you. I think we're about time to wrap up. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone on the panel for your great contributions. Super impressed. Santiago, thank you for making this happen. And also thank you to everyone out here who came and participated. And thank you to everyone who participated online. I don't know, Santiago, if you have
Yeah, just to mention that tomorrow is the third and last day of the Thinking Aloud Colloquium. So we'll be starting at 10 in the morning at the Montreal Botanical Garden, and we'll be there with 3 different activities and panels as well, including the keynote by Elder Bill Jones, who's visiting. And to get in. So if you're interested in joining us tomorrow at the Montreal Botanical Garden, Botanical Garden, sorry, we were at the Montreal Science Center last night. So please send us an email and we'll add you to the list so you get access and you can come into the garden to join us in the activities. So if you check our website, Elastic Spaces website, as well as the Thinking Aloud programming that's been published at the Concordia University website and ForSpace as well, you'll see our registration link and also our contact. So our contact is there, so send us an email. Is there, I think well, after this, I think there's a group that's heading to the black box space. So if you want to stick around and see some projection in the black box space, stick around, but I don't have the... I don't have the specific details here. Let me see. So tomorrow, the Montreal Botanical Garden will be in the amphitheater B104, which is the biodiversity research lab that's part of the UDM program. So
Hey, Lila, here's a mic.
If you haven't registered, sorry. To get into the botanical gardens, we're providing free entry. So if you haven't already registered, if you could contact the person at the event link and we'll convey that to the desk.
Yeah.
So you go to the gate and just beyond the gate is a building to your left. And it's called the Biodiversity Center. And the amphitheater is just inside there.
So we'll have signs tomorrow as well to guide you, and we'll be around wearing our name tags. And I mean, if you're here and you're interested in joining us tomorrow, just approach us after and we'll write your name and email. I think that might be easier, but maybe for the ones that are online, send us an email. Okay, thank you.
Okay, everyone, thank you to the Elastic Spaces team and everyone for this series. It's not over yet, of course. Don't forget about tomorrow. Everyone online, also, we're going to be closing up the Zoom and the live stream, but don't forget that this and the other part of the series are available online now. I just want to also take a moment to wish you a great weekend. Thank you for attending everything here at ForSpace, and have a great day tomorrow. Good night.